Okay, hello everyone. So good to have you all here. All right. Okay, so it looks like I have some. Um, I had some of the streaming playing on my own computer, so that's good. Awesome, great to have you all here. Great to see you all here. Looks like it's running. Let me see if you can hear me. If you can see me, say hello in the chat. I already see here Andres saying hello. Hey, Andres, good to see you here. Andres, a good friend from Uruguay that's living in Peru right now, so that's great. And he's already saying looking forward to start of this one. So we're already live. We're already here. So welcome. So I see also the Java champion Baslur here with us. Hey, Baslur, how you doing? Rafael is also here with us. Hey, hello, Rafael. So good. Ediel. Hello, Ediel. Michael. Hello, Michael. Everyone's here. Okay. So without further ado, let me bring here my good friends, one of the manager of the Quarkus Club, Igor de Souza. How you doing, Igor? How's everything, man?
Hey, how's it going? Hello, guys. Hello, everybody. It's really nice to be here. It's kind of a special event, like first time in a together combined event with Soul Java and Quarkus Club. And of course, we should bring someone to talk about Quarkus.
Yes, that's great, man. That's awesome. We should have put a combined logo here, right? So if we didn't think about that, but that's okay for the next time. So it's funny because we have two De Souzas here, right? So we're friends and
We are
family, right?
parents. We are family.
Yeah, that's great. So I see lots of people here.
So
Say
a little bit of an advertisement here, right? If
yes.
you're watching this by Soul Java or by any other channel, YouTube channel, and you're not aware what is Quarkus Club, Quarkus Club is kind of a Discord group where we talk about Quarkus, not mainly Quarkus, Java in general, or sometimes Kotlin or any JVM language, and it's free for all, open environment. Sometimes we like to say bad things, right? I always joke like we we normally can say whatever you want. I prefer Spring than Quarkus. No one cares, right? We are not here to say A is better than B or vice versa. And the opposite. If you're here watching by Quartz Club, yes, this is me, Igor de Souza, your normal host. You're not in the wrong place. This is Bruno Souza, and you're not familiar with Soul Java. Soul Java is the biggest jug around the world, right, Bruno? You can definitely find Discord, Slack, everything. They are everywhere, right?
Yeah. So let's do this, right? So once we start here, we're gonna put on the chat the link for Quarkus Club. So Igor, if you can put for me here on the private chat, if you can put me the link so I can put to everyone, right? So we can have that. And let me just say a quick hello. There's so many people saying hello here, right? So let's just kind of put everyone here in the chat right now. So hello, Michael. Hello, Claudio. Hello, Ivan, the Java guys, Ivan. Actually, Ivan is in Munich, right? So and where our guest is from, right? So let's get our guest here. So Antonio, hey Antonio. So lots of people here are saying hello. Thanks everyone for being here with us. So without further ado, let's bring here our special guest today, right? So, he's a Java champion, he's an author, he's a consultant, and and he's a Quarkus specialist, a performance, like a productivity specialist, right? So, bring here our good friend Sebastian Daschner. And the
Hello,
internet
hello.
vibrate for Sebastian. Hey, Sebastian, how you doing, man?
Hey, doing really well, doing really well. So thanks for having me, and especially in this special occasion for the collaboration of a lot of Java and Quarkus fans. And I'm really looking forward to the session to convince people, if they're not already, why they should care about Quarkus. And also, we were going to have a lot of live coding. So this is going to be the fun part. And yeah, also, even better, you can ask questions. So I always tell people on live events, please make use of the opportunity to chat with us. It's not just watching a video, unless you watch the recording, I guess, but you can really, interact and ask some questions that you have. Use the chat to say hello. That's always cool. Also to hear some people. And yeah, looking forward.
That's great. And so Claudio Miranda is a good friend. One of the guys that started So Java with us. He's saying, let's go for Quarkus. So, hey, Claudio, how are you doing, man? Good to see you here. We also have Antonio saying that I'm finally working with Quarkus, right? So that's great, Antonio. That's awesome. So we're gonna do more for you to do even more here today. That's great. So Sebastian, this week we had like a that's a good moment for us to talk about this, right? We had this milestone moment, right? In terms of in the Java world, right? That James Gosling just announced his retirement just a couple of days ago, right? And Java has been, he created Java like 30 years ago, and he's now he's now retiring. And one of the things that he said is that he now is looking forward for a lot of side projects, and it's going to be fun, right? And I think that's one of the things that we see a lot for developers, right? Looking for this autonomy and go do fun things. And we talk about Quarkus. Quarkus kind of promotes itself as a fun project. So, do you think that we developers that we can get like the autonomy that we need, the independence that we need, so we can go after fun things to do even while we're working, or do we need to wait for retirement?
No, it's definitely, I mean, ideally, it's already the case that just your job contains so many fun technologies and fun things to try out and to work with. And, all the recent versions of Java and versions of, enterprise technology, even if you're not using the latest Java, although you should, but they're really productive and fun to use. So I think, it very often doesn't feel like work. It feels like having fun. And and even if your job doesn't contain the latest, coolest technologies, you can still use these times in the evening to learn more, to get more experience with other technologies. So maybe you can also switch your jobs to more fun projects. So yeah, I would see it more in general. That you shouldn't think of it as work and then not work, non-work, where only the fun starts after work. You can definitely combine this, and ideally that's already the case. And I think that a lot of Java technologies offer the opportunity to have fun at work.
Right, that's great. So now, you have been. I mean, you're independent. You have your own company. You're independent, and you have courses. So, by the way, I'm also going to put Sebastian's pages, and so you guys can go off and take a look, because he has lots of great courses there. So you built this like this life of independence and autonomy, right? So how important that is, and maybe how hard it was for you to do that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it almost came as I don't want to say as a side effect or something. It started, so right after my studies, I started to become a freelancer, like self-employed, where at that time, with a quite young age, everybody thought that's quite risky or quite crazy. But ultimately it was actually because I thought about, okay, what do I want to work with? And then I had a look at a few companies where, from the outside, it sounds really cool, which technologies they work with. But then once you have a closer look, you're like, okay, I guess, yeah, that's just a regular business or something. And then after having a certain experience with projects, I just thought, okay, what, why not just try it, to be an independent? And, it worked. It worked out quite well. And yeah, I guess it's very important to have this autonomy, but it also can come, I don't know, it can come quite naturally once you just take initiative. So it's kind of interesting, because I had this a few times where I were in a project and say, okay, hey, this is not really working out for certain reasons, and then sort of like just spoke up my mind and said, okay, this is maybe what we should do, or trying to also talk to some managers or people up the chain, like a CTO. And then people talk to me, is like, oh yeah, you're a Java champion, you can do that. If I would do that, I would lose my job or whatever. And actually, I think, no, it's the other way around. you should first take initiative to say, okay, what can I contribute? What maybe can I change? Where should I speak up to do things? So if you take the initiative to say, okay, maybe a certain approach can be improved in your project, and then you learn about it and you say, okay, you know what, I'm going to spend some time to whatever it is, improve the testing, improve refactoring, maybe use a new version of technology and have a migration there. And then, you know, you can go to your managers or your team lead and say, okay, talking about, you know, the business numbers, why does this make sense from a business perspective? We're going to talk a little bit about this when Quarkus enters. But I think it's really about being a little bit more proactive, and then also sort of taking the opportunity to have this independence for you. So it doesn't have to start with a big step that you say, okay, now I'm going to quit my job. Now I'm going to become my own business owner or a freelancer or whatever it is. But you can take the agency where you see it, or where there is an opportunity in your current job, in your project, and then just to try to improve things. So it's basically, in a nutshell, you know, caring about what the situation you have, not trying to wait for the perfect situation, but saying, okay, how can I improve this? And then, you know, being proactive about it. And usually that's a good idea, or that this then pays off. So I hope this somewhat answers the question.
Yeah, that's great, man. So guys, I put Sebastian's QR code right here, so you can go to his website right now. I'm also going to put his website right here on the chat for everyone. So, you know, there's all kinds of interesting material there, and courses and workshops that he does, all of that. So, you know, go get in contact with Sebastian. Okay, so Igor, do you have any questions about Quarkus or anything like this that you want to talk about right now?
I have two things to add, right? Another marker in history, if you like, right, is that Quarkus group is almost about 3,000 members, the best or the biggest community of Quarkus outside IBM related, right? And the YouTube channel is near 1,000 subscribed. So I think that's a mark, right? We can say like that. Hello, people. If you work on IBM or IBM, if you work on Red Hat, and you want to contact the biggest Quarkus, we want you guys here. Come and contact us. And but anyway, I always joke about all invites on the Quarkus Club. Are you going, Sebastian? Are you going to say bad things about Quarkus? And why not?
Why not? Yes. Well, actually, no, I'm not. But that's a really good point that you bring up. We should also, you know, be brave enough to call things out when they're not that great, right? Like we should never be blinded by the coolness of some technology that we say, okay, we're either all Spring or all this or all that, and then, you know, it's sort of like a religion, and it shouldn't be this, because everything, you know, has flaws, and you should keep a calm and a sober mind about it, is to say, okay, what can be improved? And actually, I submitted quite some issues to Quarkus, which were fixed surprisingly fast. So, you know, all of the folks maintaining that, mostly Red Hat people, are really active, and that's also sort of cool. But no, you should always be brave enough to speak up when this is the case. Actually, I'm not going to say anything negative, because quite frankly, I don't have really anything negative to say about Quarkus, but I'm independent, so I could say whatever I want. But yeah, no, I'm not.
Nice.
Okay, cool. Okay, that's cool. So just say a quick hello here. I see Max, right? So Max is one of the coordinators here of SoJava. So thanks, Max. You know, is one of the guys that did so much for SoJava and actually got all the SoJava's YouTube channel back in activity and all the meetups. So thanks a lot, Max. Great to have you here. And then Eduardo is also here with us. Hey, Eduardo. You know, congratulations to everyone here. That's great. Thanks a lot. And also lots of other people here: John Noel, Gabriel, Claudio. Thanks everyone for being here. It's amazing to be here with you. And I want you guys to make this very interactive. So please send your questions while Sebastian is speaking. And so, you know, he might answer questions during the call, or we answer questions later. So keep sending your questions, because we want to make this extremely interactive. All right. So without further ado, Sebastian, I think that the stage is yours, man. And we'll be here with you. So with you guys, Sebastian Daschner.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. And yeah, for everybody already, thanks for the interest in Quarkus. So this session is going to be, well, how to convince people, if they are not already convinced, why you should use Quarkus. And the scope of the sessions will be mainly for developers. So I know most of you will work as developers or, coding with Quarkus, but also we might have a look into certain technologies, and here it's Quarkus, from different angles. If you maybe need to talk to a manager and convince them, maybe you're talking to some architect, somebody who's not that much into the details why Quarkus is or might be a cool technology. And it also helps us to understand the business better, because I'm going to talk about this. That's also quite important and makes us better developers. And as I said already about the whole independence and trying to be, this independence consultant, more like-minded person, this really helps. So why or how to convince your colleagues to use Quarkus? So yeah, I was already very nicely introduced. My name is Sebastian, and I, as you can see, work a lot with Java. So that's also my main background. I'm an independent consultant and also trainer and conference speaker, and I help a lot of companies. Also, I do consultation, code reviews, things like that. If any of that might be interesting to you, please always feel free to reach out, and maybe I can help there. And now let's enter Quarkus. Let's have a look at this Quarkus technology. I think most of you already know what Quarkus is about roughly, but just as a very quick introduction, especially if you go to the website, it says something like supersonic subatomic Java. And that's also very interesting because especially in the beginning when Quarkus came out, it was somewhat seen from the Java community that it's, a way to do enterprise Java on a native stack, like on a native runtime. And that's not necessarily the case, especially not in the beginning. It's first of all a very well advanced and performing enterprise Java solution for just a regular JVM technology. So that means you can run a Quarkus application just with your regular Java with whatever JVM you want to use, whether it's OpenJDK, whether it's OpenJ9, whether it's Azul or anything else. It just runs really well. Now, we're going to have a look into this in a little bit more detail. And before I go to my project, let's first have a look at Quarkus from a developer perspective. So for developers, what is interesting and what is really cool about Quarkus, I think a lot of you already have some experience with it. And if so, that's really cool. If not, then after the session, you should really try it out because, again, I'm independent. I'm not here to sell you anything. Don't take my word for it. Just try it out. And also, that's what I told a lot of people. And just when they try it out the first time, when they see this development mode that we're going to have a look in a second, they just say, hey, that's really cool. It feels just really nice. That flow experience is pretty cool. So let's have a look at the first point, that is the developer experience and fast turnaround times. Now, for a developer, this is really one of the coolest part in Quarkus, because when we are coding, like while we're coding, while we're developing, when our hands are on the keyboard, we can get super fast feedback, and the whole coding experience feels really like a joy. It feels like a flow. We're in that flow experience. We don't need to wait. And for that, talk is cheap. I just want to show you. So that's an example project. I call this Quarkus Playground, and it has a lot to do with coffee, because if you didn't know, I like coffee a lot. And we're going to use this. You can get the code on GitHub. It's actually not that much about the code, but how to work with Quarkus. But still, if you want to get it, you can. And this uses Quarkus in a fairly recent version, Quarkus 3, with a few dependencies that we're going to have a look at. And it basically is a hello world for now that says something about coffee. So it can return coffee with some enterprise application. I'm going to walk you through the code in a second, but basically, first of all, I want to show you how to use this. So we can use, for example, Maven in order to package and build our application. I'm going to show you also in a little bit later what that does or how this works. But once our application is built, we can start and use it with Java, just like plain Java, java-jar, we can use to start it up. It resides under the directory Quarkus app, Quarkus run. That works a little bit similar to nowadays what you would do with a fat jar approach with Spring Boot and others, where then I can say, okay, I start up my application, which you can see starts up very quickly. And then this is active for an HTTP mapping 8080, where I can say hello world. Let's open a new terminal for that. I can say localhost 8080, and then in my case, I say coffee, and it tells me coffee. Okay, so that's very basic hello world. Now this application runs. Okay, that's not that interesting yet. But what is cool, if I now want to code and change something, there is this so-called development mode, Quarkus Dev, that is invoked by usually a Maven plugin. Gradle is also supported, but basically there is a plugin available that has a connection to your code where, well, it takes and starts the application, as you can see here, but it still keeps a connection to the code. So if I now invoke it, it's still there. But if I now go to my code and say I change something here, for example, coffee exclamation mark, I invoke it again, it very quickly redeploys everything. It detected the change. It only invokes what needs to be changed. It tells me here, okay, there was a change in this class, very quickly restart it in a few milliseconds, and then it's there again. It's up and running. Okay, so this was a very basic change. I can change the string here, change this again, coffee question mark. And of course, if the question is coffee, then the answer is yes, please. So we can change the code here. This was very basic, but you can change basically everything. If we have time to do some more live coding, I will show you this by just keep the development mode running, and it will just keep recompiling. So if I'm coding along, coding, I create a new class, I refactor a method, it might not all the time work to recompile. Doesn't matter. It will just try again until it's up and running. So that's a very nice experience, because then I can just keep it coding. Okay, so that's just trying it out basically like as you would in a browser. I can actually open this up in a browser, hit F5, and then I can refresh it. But of course, if we do a proper programming approach, we should have some tests, right? So if I say I have some tests here, this is a very basic test that just equals for a string, and I run this test in my IDE, which I use my favorite IDE, IntelliJ. Tells me now the test failed because, well, I changed the string, so I need to update the test, press the shortcut, and now the test passes. The cool thing is Quarkus also can do that, and it can do it even a little bit faster than my IDE. Why? Because it keeps all the classes basically, well, compiled and active, and will recompile and rebuild everything once it detects changes. So how to do this? In my Quarkus Dev mode, it actually supports testing. So if I press here, there are some commands that you can press H for help to get some information here. These are basically keyboard shortcuts where I say, okay, O for test output enabled, and then R for running the tests and rerunning them. Here you see how quickly it runs the test. That's really cool. It keeps everything compiled, and once you hear my keystroke, I hit it there, it's already running and giving me the result. That's pretty cool. So I see this especially once I change something here. Let's say I want to change, let's change the production code first, coffee exclamation mark, I switch over, and it's super fast. It already tells me, okay, this test now fails. So I go to the test, I fix the test, now I go over, everything is green again. So you see that fast feedback. This not only works with unit tests, because unit test is quite simple, but also with a more integrative test, or you can call them system test approach that I have here in my IT, in my integration test. So this actually connects to my system using localhost 8080 and tell me, okay, please get the coffee/coffee, and then see if this is equal to coffee. Okay, I can run this in my IDE here as well. I run this test. I expect it now to fail because now that is different. So I need to fix that test to coffee exclamation mark as well. I run it again, and now I get this result. Okay, cool. This works in the IDE. Of course, I can run my tests here, but in Quarkus, this also works. Now, it doesn't execute that test. Why is that? Because it uses the same conventions like Maven does. Maybe you know about this. If you do a Maven package or a verify, it doesn't run your integration tests like everything that ends with IT. It only runs test, TST, that are so-called surefire tests. So in order to do that, I can change actually the pattern. And now this is something really cool that you might or might not know. There is actually a command line available in the Quarkus Dev mode if you press : and then you can have something here to have a few commands. For example, if I say test pattern exclude, that per default is set to this IT. If I set it to empty and now test again, now it runs 2 tests. That includes my IT. So now actually it runs this integration test, and it does an HTTP call every time I press my key here, which is pretty cool because you see how fast this is. So again, from the coding perspective, what would I expect from a really nice workflow? I would say, okay, I changed something in my production code. I switch over here. I say, okay, first of all, my unit test fails and the integration test. Okay, let's fix my unit test first. I go and remove this here. I'm going to save, switch over. Now my integration test fails. Okay, let me fix this as well. Switch over. Now everything is green. And you see, while I'm talking, my hands were just on the keyboard all the time, so I don't need to wait, which is really cool. And you can build up a pretty nice development workflow with Quarkus here, and you can go quite crazy how this works. So there's even more, and I was showing this in my courses and on my YouTube channel if you're interested. So for example, you can define some aliases here that basically mean you can define an alias for what I just typed manually into this window by defining a character alias. So for example, the digit 1 or 2. So now if I say I press 1, I exclude the ITs and I only run my unit tests. Now if I press 2, I run all of them, right? So you can come up with different suites and different levels of what you want to work on right now, all while staying in this mode. And if you think about it, that's pretty much the ideal experience because it doesn't require me to context switch. It doesn't require me to wait because I really don't like waiting times, right? That's typically when we get distracted, when we pull out our phone, even if you just need to wait 20 seconds for your test build or something like that. That's usually, we grab another coffee, we get distracted. That's not a good idea. And what Quarkus allows us is just to have a perfect development workflow that doesn't require us to wait. So you can come up with a pretty decent setup. And again, these were only 2 test classes, of course, but the same works in really, really big projects. And I've worked now with quite huge Quarkus projects with many, many classes. It works extremely well. So this is really nice how you can set up this thing. We can talk more about this if you're interested. Okay, but basically this is one of the main important points: developer experience and fast turnaround times. There are at least 3 interesting things here. First one that I showed is the very quick turnaround time, so it doesn't require us to wait pretty much no matter what you change. If you change your classes, that works. If you change configuration files, that works. It will just reload. Even if you change POM-XML dependencies, it will actually download the dependencies and keep running. You don't need to restart that dev mode even for that. The second thing is fast testing, like really the test turnaround times that you can also do while in the development mode. And the third thing I quickly want to show is the debug, which is also kind of cool. I don't know if you know this, but you can actually set a breakpoint and it has the debug mode enabled. I can go to, let's do this real quick. My local host debug. I know that's kind of small now, but basically what I'm setting up is the typical local host remote JVM debug, port 5005. That's the default string for that. So basically what Quarkus does, it has a debug port already opened, or it listens to that port once it starts with the dev mode, and I can connect to it. Now you see my IDE, it has the check mark that breakpoint is active. And if I now invoke another request here, it will actually capture my breakpoint and I'm there and I can just debug this, which is pretty cool. I use this very often. Sometimes I also just use the system out debugging because quite honestly, if I say I have a variable here, for example, and I want to debug that variable, I can just print it here and it reloads everything so quickly. I don't even necessarily need to debug. I can just say, okay, now reload it again, and now it's here. So quite honestly, I do this. Logging is a whole topic on its own, so I wouldn't keep these logs in anything production code. So let's undo this again. But if you need to debug something, either you use the debug mode or you can just quickly insert some code and refresh. That's just pretty cool. All right, so that's quite nice. Before we go to the next part, let me have a quick glance into the chat. if I can answer something. I want to answer questions that are related to what I just talked about for now. Otherwise, we can do this a little bit later. Questions about some frameworks. One question, if the project from Baslu, if the project becomes large, don't you think this will slow us down? Very good question. As always, it depends. That's the nice thing to be an independent consultant. The answer to every question in the world is it depends. So the question is just what it depends on, but you can answer. You can always say this. It depends, and you're probably right. Yeah, so it depends on how you set up your test. So basically, if you do the tests in the way what I just showed you, and I have a lot of content on that, if you want to check this out on my website about how to set up proper testing. Actually, it's quite a complex topic. So I have a pretty big whole video course just on testing and how to set up effective testing. I'm quite rigorously doing this approach that I say my tests have to run really quick. And with quick, I mean they should run with a default test framework such as JUnit, or you can do testng if you want, and nothing else. And don't start anything from the life cycle, but basically assume that the system is running and just connect to it. What I just have here, it assumes that it's running. If I would stop my system, it would fail, obviously, but it tries to connect to localhost or whatever. And that's really good because then these tests run really fast. So you saw how fast this runs, and even just HTTP calls locally are very quick, even if I do hundreds of them. So I can say from experience, even if this project grows and I have a lot of these things, you can run hundreds of these test cases in no time if they're just plain JUnit, if they don't use any crazy reflection, if they don't start up stuff or try to check for stuff for the life cycle. So I usually say this, my tests and the test environment life cycles that should be separated. So I start up my life cycle first, which is what I did with Quarkus Dev and maybe a database. And, we can do some fun things a little bit later if we have time. But the test scenarios themselves, they should not tingle with the environment. The test scenario should just rely on that everything is already running. And then you can do this really, really quickly. And yeah, but it's a very good question. That's actually I think quite important to also keep a good development turnaround as the project moves on. So that's also why this is an area of content that I'm quite interested in, and why I created a lot of content there. Because with testing especially, you can just very easily go for the hello world testing of Spring context tests or Quarkus tests, which is not the best idea if you have a big project, because it will just make you slower, the more test cases you add. But yeah, that's a very good question. So thanks a lot for that question. Awesome. Okay, so we can talk about that cool developer experience and how nice this Quarkus coding mode is all evening or day if you want. But let's move on to a little bit more interesting things for developers. Actually, I have some more developer-related topics there. But as I said, the name of the session is really why you should care about Quarkus, and maybe you can convince others. So I want to drive home some other points before we do that. If we have time, I can do some more live coding there. The next point, why Quarkus is quite interesting, is it includes and supports known and well-supported APIs. For example, I'm quite sure you've already seen this syntax. Let's go a little bit over the code. I have my resource here, which is a JAX-RES resource. That means here already with the new namespace Jakarta, it has a REST mapping for HTTP services that are implemented very nicely with this declarative coding of annotations. So I just have my class here. I throw some annotations on it. Pretty sure you've seen them before. Maybe if you come from the Spring background, this would be a REST controller and then get mapping and things like that. And here, this is probably a known API. Chances are you have worked with such things because they have been around for a long, long time. So in some way, Quarkus delivers on that promise that has been made for many years, that we say Java EE, now Jakarta EE, has made that promise that you say, you just learn the API and the implementation is, can be specific. We can compete on different implementations. We can swap out the implementation. And now that is what Quarkus did, because the build, how Quarkus works internally, and I will show some things a little bit later, is very different to a traditional application server, and even also very different to how Spring works. But the APIs are the same, and that's really cool because the coding model for us is known. Pretty sure you've seen these annotations. If you learned them in the past, you can just reuse them. You can reuse your knowledge. That's really nice. There's a lot of content out there. There are specifications that you can read, how an implementation should behave and implement that, right? So what @inject means here and things like that. An application scope for CDI, another technology that is supported. And that is the case because Quarkus comes from that background, actually. It includes a lot of technologies such as Wildfly that have been out there for many, many years that, of course, have been adapted for Quarkus. But for us developers, we don't need to care about that. We can just code with these known APIs. So that's pretty cool. And I also think that makes a lot of sense because just because there is a new technology doesn't mean we have to reinvent the wheel. And how much value do we get if we have yet another Java framework to do RESTful web services, right? How many do we need? Like actually JAX-RS works really well for this regard. Or dependency injection works really well with CDI, or here @inject plus CDI scopes. This is really, really good technology. So there's actually nothing lacking in my eyes. So we can use these APIs. They're supported in Quarkus and they work really well. And that's also really nice about these standards. That we can use them there. So yes, Andres says that's exactly what I love about Quarkus, that it implements these standard APIs. I really agree. I think that's a great point there. And yeah, that was always the promise, and Quarkus delivers on that. That's pretty cool. Same is true for microprofile. There are also some things there with standards or de facto standards supported here. The list is very long what Quarkus supports nowadays, and so on. Another thing that already goes into the details a little bit with how Quarkus is built and works internally is the very good container or cloud support that Quarkus comes with out of the box. So what does that mean? Well, basically, nowadays we use the cloud, quote unquote, or container technologies or cloud native technologies that might be containers, orchestrations such as Kubernetes, OpenShift, and so on quite extensively. And Quarkus, Quarkus as well, but Java nowadays works really well in containers, and Quarkus also does so out of the box. Basically, it comes with everything that you would expect, like a good health check support out of the box and things like that. But one of the interesting things that is not talked about very often is basically how Quarkus builds and then also can be used in Docker files, because that's quite interesting and is a little bit counterintuitive at first if you're not quite familiar in that space. So if I build my application, the Quarkus app here, and if I have a look into it, that's kind of interesting at first because this Quarkus run is the application that I just started. But it is not a fat jar. You see, it's tiny. This is 600, bytes. It's pretty much empty, and all of the magic is split up in different directories. So, for example, the app directory contains my application, and if I say, please have a look at that, it just contains the classes that I included and then I compiled, and all of the other things are there in lib and Quarkus. Okay, so why is this the case? Let's have a look into lib main. So you see there are a lot of dependencies here. Why is this the case that it's split up so weirdly? You could just make a fat jar and it would work. Yes, but actually you don't want a fat jar. Why? Because of the container layering, how OCI containers or Docker containers work. So if I have a look at a Docker file, for example, I say I use a Docker file with certain, base images and things like that. And now I copy over my dependencies. Now you could say, well, that's kind of annoying. I need 4 copy statements instead of just 1 for the fat jar. Yes, correct. But it will actually optimize this layer by layer and only add, starting from the end backwards, what has been changed and not the steps before. With this Merkle tree setup, how Docker actually builds these things and detects the changes. So if I go and say I built my project and now I do a Docker build of an image that I actually use my private a Docker registry here just to prove the point that I say, okay, let's call this hello or app temp, just to prove that point that I can actually push it. What does that mean? I built the image, and here you see, okay, I needed to build all of this, and now I'm going to push the image real quick to my repository. So you will see, okay, I need to push not the base image, but here the dependencies, because I just recently updated the Quarkus version. But now if I rebuild my application, it gets new timestamps. Now it's a different application. And I rebuild the Docker build here, you will see that it can say, okay, until here, just using the cache, and it only needs to copy what has been changed. And that becomes quite clear once I do a push over the wire. Now I only need to push a few kilobytes. And that's really cool. And that's the case for building, that's the case for pushing, for pulling, and also for storage sizes. So if I rebuild an application that otherwise would be a fat jar with many, many megabytes, I don't get the storage on my disk with many megabytes times how many times I build it, but only a few kilobytes, because the rest reuses the base layer. So that's pretty cool. Now, this was a lot of talk for just explaining that, but that's actually the reason why Quarkus does it. You can also build a fat jar if you want. You can go to native. We'll talk about this a little bit later. But just out of the box, this works really well. And that's a very nice approach to work with Docker containers. And that's actually what we use for pretty much all the enterprise projects or enterprise apps that I work with in my projects. They are pretty much all JVM-based applications running on containers. All right, so that's that. That's the basis I wanted to show. Now, let's switch gears a little bit, because I want to basically make arguments from all different perspectives. So not just for developers, although if we have time, we can come back for more live coding if you're interested. But for now, let's have a look at a slightly different group, the architects. Because architects are also technical folks, but they have a slightly different angle. And in order to become a better developer, and also we talked about independence also, in order to, being able to become more independent and also more successful, that people look up to you and see, okay, you understand not just your development view, but also really the bigger business as such. We need to be able to take on a different view and also have the empathy to look to other people and say, okay, what are they actually interested in? So for architects, what is interesting in Quarkus, or why should they care about Quarkus? So for architects, it's kind of interesting to look at the bigger picture and say, okay, let's say from a traditional enterprise perspective for your JVM application, either you have something like an application server or you're running Spring, and things like that. So you had to care about your runtime, what is actually running, especially for the application servers. If you have multiple applications deployed to them, they need to be compatible. You have certain versions, you have certain Java versions, things like that. And that is also kind of interesting. So it's very important that Quarkus runs just in the JVM world. So first of all, Quarkus is just the Java application, which I showed you. When I built it and ran it the first time, I just did it with my plain Java. So in my case, this using Temurin, I think that's an OpenJ9 version. You can also have the plain OpenJDK. You can use Azulo, or any other JVM that you want that you can build up yourself. This is supported in Quarkus. Which is an important point, because you might say, hey, let's just use the latest and coolest and whatever, and maybe let's go native. I talk about this in a second. Yeah, but the architects and also then the other technical teams, especially the operations or DevOps people, will care about that, right? Because it is important what you run in production, and it is important how that behaves. So in other words, if the operation folks have experience with how to run your particular JVM in that version from that vendor, how to take a thread dump, how to restart and everything, that's important what it actually is running. So you have the possibility to do that, to choose that with Quarkus, because you don't even have to use OpenJDK. You can use your JVM of choice. I actually did this in my Docker file. Maybe you noticed I use a particular base image, which uses this IBM Semaru runtimes, which is the OpenJ9, in this case with 17. you can swap to whatever your base image you want. And this is supported in Quarkus. So it's just a plain JVM application for your runtime. So these considerations are important. Now, what else is important from a technical perspective, and especially then from a bigger business space, is the resource consumption, and then this discussions about whether to use JVM or native. So that's kind of interesting, and especially because very often Quarkus was seen in that regard, that it mainly is built for a native stack, and it's sort of true. So let's have a look at that. If you go to the website quarkus.io, we have some performance comparison. Now, always, of course, be a little bit cautious with these numbers. They are very example numbers. Your mileage will vary. You will come up with different numbers if you compare with your particular application and so on. But in the big numbers, from a statistics perspective, it does make sense, or there is a certain correlation. What does this show? It shows the resource consumption with megabyte of memory, so basically memory footprint, but also the first response times, like how fast it starts up. And you saw that it already started up quite quickly in my case. So traditional cloud native stack here is basically a Spring Boot application. So that is the comparison. And if you run stuff with Quarkus, you will, just by using Quarkus, save a lot. Like here, that's almost a half, which is kind of cool. So if we have a look at that, this already saves you quite some resources. And we will talk about this a little bit more from a business perspective, which pretty much equals to money, right? So you will save a lot, especially if you have a big IT, just by swapping your applications to Quarkus. Why is that? Let's talk a little bit about details, what Quarkus actually does differently. So a little bit of background in the enterprise world. How does an enterprise software usually work? The nice story is of the development model, and that's the same in Spring or in Java EE application servers. How do I write my code? I mainly care about the business logic, that I say, okay, get a single coffee string that returns the string, or actually here in this other resource, if we have time, we can show a little bit there. I get some coffee orders here that I can create. I say, okay, please add some coffee here. And I talk about certain coffee orders that come with the drink type and things like that. So in other words, I'm focused on my business logic that is coded in Java. Now, with all the integration, with all the magic that happens in the enterprise space here, for example, with HTTP mappings, with persistence, databases, transactions, things like that, I have a declarative programming model, which means I just write my Java code and I throw some annotations on it, and then magically it works. Okay, so there is no magic. So how does it work? Well, easy. Your application server or your Spring application or runtime, once you deploy your application, starts scanning the whole world, right? It starts scanning your Java project and look for known annotations. So it might scan your code here and say, oh, add path. I know what that means. I know the semantics behind it because it implements a certain standard. Add application scope. I know what that means. So that means I have to provide this thing as a bean with a certain scope. Okay, and so on and so forth. So it starts scanning your code. It builds up this meta model and does a lot of stuff to then come up with a runnable application that in this case will implement an HTTP endpoint that serves /coffee. So when you invoke an HTTP GET request on that, then it will invoke this code and things like that. So all of that is pretty cool from our perspective because it makes the coding easy. But for the deployment time and the runtime, this is a lot of effort, which is why these application servers have been quite slow in the past. And even big Spring applications are just slow to deploy. Slow meaning many, many seconds, up to many minutes, up to half an hour, and even worse. It takes a lot of time to do this. Why? Because there's a lot of work to be done. What Quarkus does differently, and this is a little bit because the world has changed to more cloud native deployments, which means we have pretty much idempotent deployments and stateless deployments where we say, we don't really use an application server where we redeploy something and change something on the fly. But instead, if we have a change, we rebuild the whole project, change our code, build it again, and then run it again from scratch, especially with containers. That's pretty much the runtime model of containers. And then if you have that, you can do things differently. What Quarkus does at build time, this is what you see here. The Quarkus Maven plugin does the build with a so-called augmentation. So it does all of that scanning already at build time. And then what it comes up with, the Java code, is already highly optimized. It got rid of all of this indirection. It got rid of all of your connections to the code, to all of this magic for annotations and things like that. And it will just be able to invoke your code as if you would have written it without all of this indirection, without the reflection, just plain Java code, which from a performance perspective, of course, is much, much better because you would have just direct, code invocations and things like that. So all of this indirection, all of the dependency injection and these inversion of control are already resolved and done and finished at build time. So once I start up the application, that's why it works so quickly. I can go to Quarkus app and it starts it up very fast because all of that work already has been done, which is also why you get this saving in resource consumption time. So that's pretty cool. And you will save a lot just by doing that. Okay, so now the next question there, if that is the case, what about the red thing here, the comparison to a native? Because if I now go and compile everything down to native, I can go even faster, right? And well, yes, kind of, but there's a caveat there. What does that mean, native? There is a way to compile a Quarkus application to a native executable. Native means native to your CPU architecture. For me, that's AMD, and I'm not quite sure if I have this configured here. I could compile this down to a native executable using Graal VM and Substrate VM, and then it is even faster, starts faster, has a little bit less resource consumption. But do I usually do this? And the answer might be surprising, but for most enterprise projects, no. I mainly use the JVM mode because of a few reasons. First of all, actually a JVM application can have a better throughput than a native one. This might sound a little bit weird, but why? Because of the hotspot just-in-time compiler. But that's a deeper performance topic there. So it depends which one is actually faster, quote unquote. It will have a slightly smaller resource consumption and will start up faster. But also in a cloud native setting, especially if you have container orchestration, that's not that important if you're already scheduling multiple instances, because then you can implement zero downtime deployments anyway. And again, Quarkus is also very fast with less than a second or around very few seconds to start up. So usually that's good enough. But you also have a benefit of the JVM mode, which is to build is much faster, because building natively is very slow. And also we have a different runtime. If I talk about the runtimes here, then probably how to handle a JVM, how to take a thread dump, heap dump, and all of these things. You might not know this with a native runtime, because that's not really a JVM anymore. And for architects, and especially then for the operation team, that's quite important. So it's not just, hey, run this thing, run this container, and be happy with it. No, it really depends what's contained inside and what you actually run, what the actual runtime looks like. So for architects, that's usually a quite interesting discussion. And usually the outcome, at least from experience in all my enterprise projects, we do use some native for special purpose things like Kubernetes operators. You can do command line applications. You can do a lot of stuff with Quarkus. But for the plain enterprise projects, we usually use a JVM mode there. So that's kind of interesting from an architect perspective. All right, so let's have a look through some more questions, because we're a lot there. Startup speed when spinning up new virtual instances. I want to confirm I'm on the right track for the specific workflow in general with startup speed, Michelle. Then yes, definitely Quarkus is the way to go. It depends also what you're interested in. So for example, what the bigger setup is. For example, if a native compilation then would make sense. Usually not if you have some sort of load balancing in front, so it's fast enough to say, okay, you can handle the traffic with other instances while one is restarting or spinning up. But yeah, that depends. But in general, yes, you're on the right track, because Quarkus by far is one of the fastest starting proper enterprise runtime in the Java space. So with proper, I mean with all of the support that Quarkus has. So yes, enjoying CDI and development, yes. An alternative to build a container image is use the Quarkus zip extension integrated into the POM. Yes, to be honest, I was never really a fan of these. Why? Because I would like control of the Docker file. I know there's an extension for that. There's also an extension for Kubernetes deployment artifacts, but I actually like to, as I say, use the technologies what they're good for. I don't like the over usage of Maven to build pretty much everything. Maven is great for building Java artifacts, including my Quarkus application. For all the other ones, I'd like to have just more control of the Docker files. And I don't know if that's still the case, but it used also the layer optimization much better. But it could be that now Jib also does this quite well. But that's me. If you're happy with the extension, please use it. I'm just very happy with Docker files, and more developers out there understand it, also if they're not Java developers. But yeah, if you're happy with it, then please use it. That's also the case for the Kubernetes integration. A frequently discussed topic in the community today is how to present a successful proof of concept. What key points do you highlight for the presentation? Yes, that's really interesting. It depends who I'm talking to. So actually, this is a little bit what this session is supposed to be, because again, what is your target group, right? And if you don't know, then you can show a lot of these points. And actually, I actually have done this for clients when they were interested, that I say I give a session a little bit similarly scoped like the one today, that I say I show a little bit of stuff for developers that they say, okay, cool, they're interested, but also for other groups like architects, and we'll talk about the business side, where then you say, okay, we can do this there. For a proof of concept, it depends how big your projects are. Like I've done this actually for migration projects that we said they had a smaller module or, some sub package where we could already have a basic Quarkus application that just implemented one particular feature, like accepting some requests, writing them to the database, and then having that. This could be a thing if it's not too complex. It depends on, your project. You could also come up with something a little bit slightly simpler, like for example, my project, or feel free to clone something from GitHub and then run this when you're more interested in showcasing the whole workflow in terms of how to build an application, what the development workflow is, how to integrate it into your infrastructure, is to say, okay, how do we build containers? How does the pipeline look like? Things like that. Actually, it's very straightforward with Quarkus because it's just, a JVM runtime. But that could be a thing then, what to showcase. So yes. All right. I'll start with bothering you. Want to offer promotion for your channel? Surprise law. Okay. Thanks for the deep dive into the native versus non-native. Yeah, if you have more questions there, please feel free to ask. That's really cool, and especially it's a non-obvious topic very often, because people think, okay, native is faster and faster is always better. No, it depends, especially from an architect perspective. There are many more things to consider, and usually we end up using the JVM mode. And you might have other things, especially with dependencies, because all the Quarkus dependencies, they will work with the native mode. That's pretty much the guarantee there. But if you have other third-party dependencies, they might not, support the whole Graal VM, Substrate VM native compilation. This is also a big benefit that Quarkus has, because in the Java world, that's not really obvious. So you cannot just take your plain Spring application and try to compile it down with Substrate VM to get a native executable. Why? Because these native runtimes work a little bit differently, especially how they handle reflection. So you need to do a lot of work, or actually that's what mainly Red Hat has done in the past, to actually support this in the enterprise runtime. That is what Quarkus does, or all of its dependencies. If you have this with some dependency that you need to use for your business and that does not support native, and I had this a few times, then you can only use the JVM mode. But again, the JVM mode works really well in this regard, and all of my production projects use it, so that's pretty good there. Okay, so is the computing cost of startup, oh, 1 second, let me go through my chat one by one. Question of startup time is quite complicated. First, the definition of startup was separated from warm-up is ill-defined. Yes, very good point. A lot of startup and warm-up is dependent on the application. Yes, very good point. That's also why your performance and especially throughput will vary over time, and which is why applications and projects who really care about performance will use a JVM mode with a hotspot just-in-time compiler, like your plain OpenJDK one, that then need to run for a certain time, and the thumb rule is 30 minutes and longer. So after 30 minutes of a lot of requests, your application sort of like stabilized how the JVM does the JIT compilation and all of this optimization there, which is of course different from startup. So if you only say, hey, it's up and running and I can get a request, yes, that's just the startup time. But the warm-up time is really like how efficiently can I handle all of my business transactions. And with that, that's a different story. And you will have different instances and then load balance and schedule them and things like that. So yes, absolutely. Okay. Claudio, is the computing cost of native builds? I don't quite understand that. Oh, there's another for your question. Compared to fast Java builds, the native build requires more computing power. Yes, leading to increased CI/CD computing infrastructure. So was this a barrier when promoting the builds? Not necessarily the computing, but yes, it's true. It requires a lot. Actually, the first time I built it on my older laptop, it crashed because out of memory for the native build. Yes, you will need more, but the bigger issue most of the time is you will really increase the build time. So instead of a few seconds with the Maven build, you really have minutes, even just for Hello World. So yes, usually if you really want for some reason the native build, then what I would advise is to have multiple stages in your CI/CD environment, so that at first you build it in the JVM mode to deploy it and test it somewhere to get faster feedback for these turnaround times. Otherwise, again, it's really slow. And then have the optimized version in the later stage downstream in your pipeline. So this will be the way to go, yes, because of that consumption. But again, if you use cloud environments, if you build very often, it also might be a question of cost for building this. Yes, definitely. All right, so Kirk, hey man, cool that you're watching. The question of startup time is quite complicated. First, the definition of startup. Oh yeah, that was your question. I was actually reading. Okay, yes, absolutely. So listen to Kirk, the performance expert there. Good approach, showing different benefits for dev and for architects. Thank you. Yes, that's also when you talk to people quite important, because we do have different angles how to view this. So not just look from a developer cool glasses to say, hey, that's a nice technology, but really that's something there. Kirk wrote, for example, Spring Boot apps require a lot of class-based scanning at startup, whereas Vue.js application doesn't, meaning that startup is hidden as a part of warm-up. Yes, that's also what I talked about earlier. The same is true for application servers, and precise measurements are not possible. Yes, yeah, because you do a lot of stuff there, and then also your runtime is already either optimized or has the class loaded in a different way that otherwise you would if you only actually start with everything that you need for later runtime, which is pretty much what Quarkus does. Yeah, very good point there. And nowadays, it really makes sense to optimize this at build time if you can, because we run small container images that already come with everything that you need at runtime. I worked at a company that argued that another framework, how to deal with his thought. Very good question. I would say for developers, just try it out. You will see that it works much, much better. For architects and the business, that's what I'm about to present some more there. And then you can argue with numbers. If you talk to business folks and then C-level and things like that, you can actually just argue with numbers and say, talk the resource consumption and the cost saving and some other things that I'm going to present in a second. Yeah, that's that. But of course, you have to have a somewhat open mind to try out new things, but that's always the case in life. Okay, Jarvis we had using Quarkus 2.7 in production in Brazil. Awesome, great. It's clear to me that Quarkus is a good answer for cloud applications when compared to Go. Yes, with that being said, what do you think about its future? I agree with Go. There's another question there. So yeah, I might be biased about that, but I think Java really makes sense from a business for multiple perspectives. It makes sense for building anything in a proper business domain for your applications, also with the richness of the tooling. The IDEs are great and all of these things, but also for the runtime. And Java performs generally, or can perform better. Why? Because of the JVM and the hotspot just-in-time compilation. So that's also another thing. If you look into really high-performing applications, if you look into the finance sector with high-frequency trading applications, they pretty much all use a JVM world, and they use Java. Also from the performance. So don't be fooled that Java cannot perform. It performs actually extremely well. So I see a bright future, or continuing to be bright future for the Java space there. Claudio, have you found many situations of customers who want to do native builds but require many code changes that didn't make sense to build native given the cost to change the code to adapt to it? Yeah, depends. Usually it was what I said earlier about the turnaround time, that you say, especially if you do many changes quite frequently, you just need to wait, and then it's sort of more annoying to wait all the time. It again can be a cost issue because somebody needs to pay for these resources. Yes, this can be a thing. Again, you might be able to split up the pipeline to say, okay, we test this just much more often in the JVM mode and then test it again once we build native, but less frequently. So that could be a solution for that. But again, after considering all of these points, for now, all of my client projects, for the backend world, we use a JVM runtime in production. So that's just what I can say about that. All right, very good questions in the chat. I really like this. We can do some more a little bit later. But for now, let's talk about the business perspective. So for managers and the whole C-level, everybody who's wearing a suit or whatever, this is a very important topic, and I can say this as a consultant, but I can also really say this for all the developers, especially if you need to talk, it doesn't matter if you call them team leads, managers, C-level, whatever, depending on your organization, anybody with a more business perspective in mind, always, try to understand them from their perspective and try to talk, business related data. What do I mean by it? Let's take the example of my favorite IDE, IntelliJ, which in the ultimate version doesn't come for free, but you need to pay for it. And very often I had this discussion where you say, okay, the IDE out there that we want to use, and let's get this tool. It really makes the project better and things like that. And if you listen to developers, they usually would say a thing like, oh, this is the coolest IDE and everybody's using it and we need it, or it's so much better than Eclipse and whatever. And all of that is true, but that's not really what managers or somebody with a business perspective cares about. Then they would say, yeah, I don't care. Just, go away. No, we don't do this because it sounds like, a toy that you want or something like this. And it's actually your fault as developer, because you need to speak their language. You need to see the world from their view. And they care about, well, money, of course, but then also productivity, velocity. Does it actually improve the project? What risk is there when we change everything, that stuff might not work anymore or take longer? So you need to argue from a different perspective. So you can come with some data. If you don't have that data, you might look at other use cases. Some tools actually put this on their websites, and again, your mileage will vary. You will come up with different percentage or data, whatever. But the point is that you need to argue from a different perspective. So you can say something like, okay, from experience, this way will make us more productive by this percentage, it will save us so and so many hours per week. And then you can do the maths, how quickly, the costs actually make sense, especially if we talk about developer salaries and, hourly rates. It should be a no-brainer, obviously. But again, you need to argue in this perspective. And the same is true for any technology that you use, especially for the technology that powers our applications, because there's a lot of risk attached to it when we just swap out things here, because it still needs to work and perform. So you need to keep this in mind. And there's actually an interesting story there with Quarkus, which I like a lot. So if you think about it, it's really like win-win-win to use Quarkus. And well, one thing is eco-friendliness, and the other thing is, of course, money. So if you have a look at the global footprint of computing, and now this is a little bit the story of eco-friendliness, and especially CO2 emissions and everything that is connected to power and to well, what we consume. So it's estimated by the UN that computing, the global footprint is about 2 to 3% of the world's CO2 emissions, which is actually quite a lot if you think about it. Just by computing. And then, of course, if we take this and say, now we can use a technology that pretty much does the same thing as our current technology by using less, and this pretty much equals to, well, you take the percentage of what you save, it equals to power, it equals to cost, it equals to a resource consumption, like, silicon, if you take the scale big enough, and then you just save a lot. So there's a big, eco-friendly story there that you can put on for the business. And nowadays it's actually quite interesting for business people if they say, hey, now we do green IT and we're more eco-friendly. That's good and fair enough, because we save a lot just by using a different technology. And then even more so if you hire performance experts such as Kirk, who's watching, who then can optimize your application further and say, okay, it's much more efficient. Then that's a nice story there. The other thing is, of course, money, most important thing in the world, right? So if we say, or if you ask business people, if we say the resource consumption, especially in the cloud world, that pretty much equals to money. If your application, uses less, especially in a big deployment. So now with a single machine, it depends, if you actually would take a smaller machine, if it consumes less. But if you think a bigger picture, especially if you have many instances, either you can scale them down or right size them to what you actually need, or just use less. Basically, you save a lot of money there. And in the big numbers, it equals to that, to that saving, to that performance, or to that percentage saving that you had when you look at the performance on the Quarkus website, for example. And the same is true for the eco-friendliness. What I said before, the less you consume, it pretty much equals to that a picture, to just have this in a more interesting way there, which is kind of cool. And this is a story that is definitely interesting for the business, and I can say so because I presented it to some clients. And also, I think this is a sort of unique technology. Now, not to praise Quarkus too much, but actually we can, because quite honestly, if you had a technology in the past that was kind of interesting for the business perspective, usually because their CEO played golf with our CEO or something like this, but then it wasn't the nicest thing for most developers, then they're like, okay, now we have to use this application server, but well, whatever. With Quarkus, that's different, that you have actually this win-win-win situation where it's definitely interesting and pretty cool for developers, but also there's a very interesting story for the business there by just saving money, obviously, but then also say, okay, we're more eco-friendly just by using this, especially if then we have a further look into the actual performance and resource consumption, and we can just do the same or do more with less by optimizing this, which is kind of interesting. So that's also something to take into consideration if you want to present that now to some business folks. You can start with numbers like these. Again, your mileage may vary. You can also come up with a small POC with your own project if you have time, and compare it with different runtimes. Also compare it with different JVMs, because they will also have an impact there. For example, J9 will then perform here even better for the resource consumption. And then just taken from there. And if you, extrapolate the numbers there, you will come up with a lot of saving in this regard. So that's that. All right. So how are we doing on these? Before we go to the very end, let me go through the chat again. We can also have a little bit more of live coding if the time allows it. So Claudio, another question. I refer to the code changes related to code that use old libraries that does reflection has to use the Quarkus extension, register for reflection. Yes, the register for reflection is a quite typical annotation to put in there to be able to enable some use cases that work if you have access to the code, of course. Sometimes you don't with third-party libraries, so that depends. But yes, this is a typical thing to keep in mind. All right, let me have a look into the chat from earlier because we had some questions about different frameworks. Now, from question from an hour ago, I'm really new in the development career and I'm learning Spring Boot now. My question is, Quarkus is a complementation of Spring Boot or a competitor? Yeah, it's pretty much a competitor because it's a different runtime. That being said, there is actually a Spring support in Quarkus, which is kind of interesting. That does not mean that you can use your Spring Boot application and run it with Quarkus. It's actually more targeted towards migrations, where you say if you have many, many hundreds of classes that are annotated with Spring annotations, you can actually run them with a Quarkus runtime with some Spring support that basically does a pretty much one-to-one mapping to the annotations to the Quarkus world and then support it there, which is interesting. So we've used this actually for migrations. But other than that, it's pretty much a different technology. And it also makes sense to then focus, if you're in a Quarkus project, to only focus on the Quarkus runtime, because also the development mode and everything is much better. Now, of course, I'm a little bit biased towards Quarkus also because of my background. But now if you're learning Spring and if you're happy with Spring Boot, please go ahead and use Spring. Spring is a great technology, and there will be many, many Spring jobs and projects in the future as well, because it's ubiquitous in the industry, and you can really do that. If you're intrigued with the development mode, though, of Quarkus, you can also try this and maybe learn a little bit more about that. Good news, if you learned all the concepts, what a bean is and what all of this transaction management is and declarative programming in Spring, it is very, very similar in Quarkus. So the learning curve is quite nice there in case you want to switch over. All right, so the other question there from Draco. I'm interested in learning a new framework to enhance my job prospects in the cloud computing field. Between Quarkus and Micronaut, which one would be a better choice for job prospects? Definitely Quarkus. So again, I sound biased, but I have yet to see a bigger or a Micronaut project at all. Well, to be honest, at least I might say it from a European perspective, but over here, Quarkus actually has been adopted surprisingly early for the usually quite conservative enterprise space. So we have had actually quite a few Quarkus projects. Again, I'm a little bit more in my niche there, but if you want to increase your job chances, I would definitely bet on Quarkus, but also because it's more fun to use, I would say. But that's that. And of course, while Quarkus has the advantage, of course, it has a huge support from Red Hat. So you really notice this, especially in the open source space, and they do a great job at supporting it. So that's that. I'm just going over the questions that we get, all of them. From Mitchell from before, I'm deploying to AWS ECS Fargate instance. Will the package native Quarkus native container build limit resource consumption? Limit resource consumption in CPU. Well, no, this build just builds it from inside a container that's doing the build. So basically, that's a cool thing with Quarkus. You don't have to install GraalVM. It will actually run it's called Mandrel builder image. It will actually pull the image during your Maven build and build it with a container, so you don't have this installed. But all of that, what I just said, happens during build time. So that is not happening then on your Fargate instance, because there you will put the already built application, probably as a container, and then run this there. So that is not related with this, and I don't think that they have that they limit resources for the builder image. Probably also doesn't make sense because you need a lot. So no, these two things are different. So that's the builder container image. All right, so just going through the chat, I think I answered all of these here for now, which is cool. So I'm really happy that we have a lot of questions there. And yeah, we saw a lot of cool code. So Bruno actually promised me that we have no time constraints. So if you're still interested in watching, let's show a little bit more stuff for developers. One more thing that I always think is pretty cool, which is persistence, and especially the support of what is called panache and the sort of repository way of doing persistence, especially with the Java EE approach. I heard this quite often, the complaints that people say, hey, in the Spring world, this is much cooler to use Spring Data JPA, and I would agree. But nowadays with Quarkus, which is now not a standard, that's not part of JPA, but it's part of Quarkus, I will show a panache support and some real quick, evening here in Europe, it's already evening, coding for persistence, for including persistence in your Quarkus application. And that also lets the dev mode a little bit shine, because my dev mode is still, no, it's not, is now still running. Quarkus dev, I started again. And for now, what I have my coffee orders that are just in memory, which is boring. So basically, if I say I go to my coffees resource, I say I create a new coffee here that will be saved in memory by saying I want to have a coffee. I still have my coffee here. That's a cappuccino. So we can order a coffee with a certain drink type. That is just a string for simplicity. And we can do that. For that, I go to coffees and say, please ask for my coffees. That is a JSON array that is empty. So there's no coffee in the system because I use in-memory storage for now. So it's just a map, basically. And I can say, I please want to have a cappuccino. So I order my coffee by posting to my HTTP endpoint. This is just implemented with JAX-RS. I can quickly show you the code, but also you can have a look at GitHub, basically saying post here, JSON-P, a standard for a JSON object. I use the string, do some checking here, and then I say basically add the coffee to my concurrent hash map, which, well, fair enough, is boring for storing this in memory, but that's what we do now. Do this once, twice, and then I can go and ask for my coffees, and I see, okay, I have 2 coffees in the system. Cool. Let's do this with persistence. So let's swap out this example and include persistence. Now I keep everything running with the dev mode, which is also a nice showcase that you can just keep it running all the time. And now we want to add persistence. There's a few helpful things that Quarkus now does in order to get a better getting started experience, because starting with persistence is always a little bit of hassle. You need to download a database or include some container, then a schema, what you need and all of this stuff. But with Quarkus, that's quite cool. For getting started, there's a so-called dev service that actually helps you here. What I have the dependencies, which for now is pretty much just my REST. It's REST easy dependency here and the health check. And if I say the rest is just test dependencies, if I say I want to have a new dependency that now adds the support for persistence in the Quarkus world, that is called Quarkus Hibernate ORM Panache. I can use Hibernate ORM, probably know about this, but the Panache extension is also a nice way to do this declaratively in Quarkus. So I add this dependency, and if I now go to my dev mode, it actually will download it here and just keep it running. I don't even have to do anything, and now it's included. That's pretty cool. But that's not enough. I also need a database driver. So I will use Quarkus, and that will be JDBC. I will use Postgres. Very nice database here. So I go over here. And now what happens is the following. That's pretty cool. Quarkus detects that you wanted a database, Postgres database support with your driver, but I didn't configure one. How do we configure stuff in Quarkus? That's fortunately much, much better than in the application server world. I can just use application properties, or what you might know from Springland, and I can do my properties here. That's still empty. I could configure a database, but I didn't, which means it says, hey, you know what? You wanted a database. Here is one. So what it does, it will actually use test containers under the hood to start up your database while in development mode, which might not be what you want, but if not, then you can configure the actual one. But if not, then this is actually very helpful. So what it does under the hood, it will use test containers to start up a database. You saw this just has been started. I didn't start this before. A Postgres database that already then you can use, which is pretty cool. Okay, nice. So I can still use my application. It still works. Now my orders are gone because it has been restarted, but now we can use the database. Cool. I didn't restart it. The dev mode is still running. So what we do now, I change my coffee entity here to make it an actual JPA entity. So this is pretty much what you know if you've been using Java EE or Spring, something like at entity. Let me refresh my IDE dependencies. At entity, where I say, okay, I can have a table with a table name. I call these coffee orders or something like this, right? So your typical JPA stuff. Now my IDE complains because it says, hey, of course I need an ID with, for example, a generated value for my UUID and things like that. And I can do all of your typical JPA stuff. Here for simplicity, I use public fields. You can also, of course, do the typical private and then getter and setters, all of these things. So that's just a JPA entity. Awesome. Now, how to use that? Because in my coffee shop, I still store it in my map. So let's delete this because I want a proper support for now the persistence. In the past, what you would have done is something like use an entity manager, right? That you inject with persistence context, and then you use the entity manager API in EE to access that, which you also know is not the nicest API. It's a little bit brittle if you want certain queries that then you need to define a name query or a native query and things like that. But in nowadays, there's a better way there, which is that we use Panache, and especially the Panache repository. There are different ways. There are also active records, which I'm personally not a big fan of. I will just show you my preferred way, but you can consult the documentation. There are many ways to go to Rome. I call this coffee repository. It's getting late for me to type, which is a class that I define that will be application scoped and that implements Panache repository base or Panache repository of an entity. The difference of these two is Panache repository will already come with all of the methods that you need for an entity that is actually an entity with a long ID, which is typically what we have very often, or I now have a UUID as an ID, as an primary key. So I use Panache repository base where I can define my own type that is a UUID. Why? Because my coffee here, as you saw, has an ID, UUID as ID. So that's what I want here. Okay, cool. That's already sufficient. I can include my own methods if I want. But basically, that's it for now. I say I want to inject my coffee repository. And then I say, in order to get a certain coffee, I go to my repository and say, for example, find by ID, which is already typed because of the generic type of the superclass or the interface. So I say find by ID, it has the correct type, and it gives me a coffee. Awesome. That's very nice. For getting different multiple coffees, it's even better. I can say, okay, list or list all or list by a specific query or a sort or whatever you have, or even something like stream that gives you a stream. But now list all is the way to go. I basically say list all the coffees and I already get a list, which is a very nice way to move forward. And that's it. Okay, cool. Let's change the other method. I say repository, that's persist coffee, and that's it. It will set the ID, I hope so. So I can remove this, can remove that and say, okay, then afterwards it will return an ID. Awesome. That's pretty much it. And that's my code changes that I was doing all while, having my live code enabled. Okay, let's do this again. Let's go through all my coffees. Okay, and it worked. Well, it's still empty, but allegedly it uses the database now. Okay, let's really try this with the post. Let's try to store some cappuccino. And of course, I get some exception here. So let's have a look at the dev mode that prints this a little bit nicer. So if you paid attention, you probably know what's the issue there. Of course you do. Even tells you here, unhandled exception, transaction required exception, transaction is not active. It even tells you, please consider adding a transaction to your method. Yes, of course, because of the JPA and JTA specification, we need to handle our transaction here, which is to annotate, especially this method with add transactional, what we can do here, or we can just put it over on our class, because pretty much all of the methods here. Well, except this one should have an active transaction. So I add transactional, and then hopefully it should work. Again, let's try it again. Okay, cool. Now it worked. 201 created. And I see now my cappuccino again. Let's have a look at my database. I can actually connect to it with pSQL. I can say that should run localhost with a specific randomly chosen port. So that's that. The user should be Quarkus. And I always confuse upper and lowercase here. Localhost, that's of course H for localhost. So, you know, props to those who can remember all of these parameters by heart. Password also Quarkus per default. And now I can have a look at the tables here. Okay, cool. Coffee orders, please show me the table. And we see that we have a cappuccino in there. Awesome. Let's do this again with, let's say, an espresso. Let's order another coffee. And now we see that this is in the database. So that's really nice. This gives us a good way to get started with this experience. Of course, if then we are in a somewhat more decent state of our project, I would include my own database with my base data, with my schema, which then I typically run in a Docker container. And then what you would do, you would put in the proper dependencies and properties here into your properties. So there where we say, okay, what is actually the way to connect to my database? And then this doesn't work anymore in this regard because it will connect to a different one. So that means if I restart my Quarkus, now it actually says, okay, connection refused, because it tries to connect to this. But actually, even in my repository, I included a script to run this database as a Docker container. So let's run this real quick. That stop everything. So, okay. Probably have an old one here. Is container name coffee shop DB. Probably didn't delete an old one. Okay, now it's gone. Run my database. So now my database runs as a container that I managed or that I defined, and we can restart everything. And now it works again. And can do the same thing with your own database. But again, the dev services, that was the name that created my Postgres database, is really helpful, especially to get started. And all of that we did while the development mode was still running. So that's the cool story. I could just do all of that while talking and while drinking my coffee. I didn't need to wait, because it just allows me to stay in that flow experience. And that's a really nice development mode. So this was another sort of demo where Quarkus can shine for developers. This was now a way to do the Panache integration. So Panache means the Quarkus way how to do a modern approach for the ORM persistence, using Hibernate under the hood, but with a nicer API that you can also check out on the Quarkus guides, or you check out some of my courses or videos where I show this. And yeah, another cool technology. Okay, cool. Let's have a look at the chat one more time. Congratulations on the video about Pico CLI on your channel. We will have more on this topic soon. Actually, I can give back this question. What else would you like to have on this topic? Because I showed how to build CLI applications using Pico CLI. For those who don't know, that's a way to do command line applications with Java that actually run fast thanks to the native compilation. So there, the native compilation definitely makes sense. You always want it there. But maybe you have some ideas what you like to see there. So please put this into the chat. Yes, and he pointed out to my YouTube channel there where I showed a video about that. So you can check this out. Maybe you could answer that. Have you used Quarkus Reactive in consulting? If so, have you seen the use case advantages? Sometimes I did, yes. I usually don't really use the reactive APIs because, yeah, usually you don't see the point or the advantages, and you really have to distinguish between the runtime that uses Vertex under the hood always in Quarkus. That's how it works. So you will, have take advantage of the programming model internally, but not necessarily in the way how you use it if your code doesn't really require, some reactive types and APIs that you use. So usually, no, I don't use it. And for advantages, well, the answer is also usually not, because, from these reactive ways of programming, that's usually not the bottleneck, or where you can actually improve things if we talk about performance, or if we talk about the way of programming. Sometimes there are use cases there. So especially if you say you want to work with a more event-based or reactive approach for some reason, where you work with different systems that react to them and things like that, with a message-based approach. But yeah, usually not. It's actually, in my mind, a little bit overhyped, that topic. I still do the plain HTTP endpoints, sometimes WebSockets, sometimes server-sent events, but with the plain APIs to just invoke them. And that's pretty much it. Sometimes asynchronous CDI events, they're also a little bit underused. They're pretty cool technology that come out of the box, but that's pretty much it. Or any other extension that you have taken advantage of when solving business use cases? That's a good question. Let me think of some. I mean, the default or the usual suspects of the Quarkus extensions, I would say, for what a typical enterprise application needs. So if you, for example, say, everything that comes with persistence, of course, in your container environment, something like health checks, resilience, like microprofile fault tolerance, things like that. But that's pretty much, standard or straightforward. But again, which I like a lot, right? So this is really a nice way of programming. It just works. It is known and supported APIs, what we have there. So that's just a cool way that is supported. And that's pretty much what I would start out with. So that's also what I told to Red Hat people when I were in their podcasts and shows, that I say, please don't overdo it with Quarkus. It actually works really well with just the stuff that it came with from a very beginning. And you can do your enterprise applications and be really productive with it. You don't need some other rocket science technologies most of the time when you're just, implementing very well developed and well-working enterprise application. So very good question. What is the best feature of Quarkus in your opinion? So I'm a little bit torn between answering the development mode and the build time optimization. But I think I say the build time optimization because it has a bigger impact, especially for the business and especially for the adoption of Quarkus, because that allows Quarkus to do all of these cool things, starting from the resource optimization that you always have, to a faster startup, to even the native builds. For me as a developer, I really care about the dev experience. So I really like the dev mode. So I would say it's that. But for the bigger adoption and why Quarkus is so successful, I would say the build time optimization. But yeah, very good question. +1 on reactive. Users aren't required and should use reactive by default. Oh, Max Ryan. So we have an official Quarkus person here in the chat as well. The use of reactive in our extension confused many, thinking they could use them reactively too. Yes. Why we did the big reactive rename, we'll try post link. But yes, the big reactive rename was just recently in some versions, where now if you want the default REST way, it's called Quarkus REST. For just that includes what would be REST easy, or where you say have JAX REST and all of these things, and then it's a little bit more hidden, the details that you're absolutely right, confused a lot of developers and saying, okay, what is about the reactive thing? Do I have to use it? Is it the better way? Is it the new version? And my answer would be something like, don't think too much about it. Like, just implement it in a plain and very well functioning working way from your code, and the Quarkus runtime will do the rest. Something like rest, no pun intended, pretty much there. So yeah, thanks a lot for chiming in. And yes, that's also my point there. How widely used is the combination of Quarkus and Kotlin? What has been your perception in this pairing in terms of the advantages and challenges? A really good question. For me, I don't really have too many Kotlin projects. Might be because of my niche. I mostly work in Java. I know that a lot of developers are really happy with it. And also it works really well because, in Kotlin, you can just also annotate stuff. Pretty much it's straightforward. I would say advantages and challenges are just in general the same is with using Kotlin or not. When you say, okay, you built this slightly more complicated there, but you get the advantages of, with all of what Kotlin has to offer in this regard. Although with the latest Java versions, this advantage becomes smaller and smaller if you think about, text blocks or Java records. So, which is why I'm not super enthusiastic about alternative JVM languages as others are. So actually all of, these years, my projects have been plain Java projects, but yeah, pretty much that's the answer. But I know a lot of people are very happy with Kotlin, and there's a big ecosystem behind it as well. And if that's your thing, definitely, try it out and use it. If you run into issues, folks, the Quarkus developers and folks at Red Hat are always happy to, take some and get some more experience with what works and what not. So to improve it. So yeah, that would be my answer, but it's pretty much whether you want to use Kotlin or not. Awesome, very good questions, very engaging sessions. That's always interesting. So I'll point out some more pointers here where you can find my stuff. If you want to have a look at the code, that's on GitHub, but it's, I guess, mainly not about the code, but about the whole thing of what I think the best stuff is in Quarkus. Please feel free to reach out if I can help with any of these topics, especially with projects or some sort of consultation or code review engagements. You can find me on YouTube, Twitter, or X, and all of these things. You can check out the courses that I have on Quarkus, especially the testing one. I think that's a cool one because that's a little bit of an underrated topic, and we have a lot of content there if you want to check this out. And yes, one more question. Have you tried using Quarkus plus React? I'm not that much a front-end person, but yes, of course, a lot of projects there. Same with Angular. There may be some extensions that help with full stack development. That's actually a good question. I'm not quite sure about some extensions that might help you with the building there. And the question if you actually want to use this as an extension or have it as a separate project that gets built individually when you have a new change or an update, which is usually, but again, I might not be on the very cutting edge there, which is usually what I would opted for in the past, because the front end builds can take quite a long time as well. So actually much longer than your typical Maven Java build. And you might not want an extension or some build for your front end to build all the time when you change your Java application. So usually what we did is having two separate projects, whether it's React or something else, to build that in a minimized way to sort of copy over the artifacts or have it as a separate runtime, as a separate container with Nginx or whatever. But the easiest way is to actually build it, copy it over to your Quarkus application that then delivers it as a static resource, with your minimized JS, for example, that then is delivered with your Quarkus application and built there. So that's usually how I would start with setting up a project there, unless you have some other requirements. But in general, it works really well with React and Angular and pretty much all the front ends that integrate well with the REST approach. And Jason, that's pretty cool. Awesome. So let's take it at that. Actually, this was now quite a long session. But I'm really happy. This was very engaging. Thanks a lot for all of the engaging questions in the chat. Also to see some known faces there. I'm really happy about this. Pretty cool. And yeah, thanks for all your attention there. I hope this was also interesting to watch. Maybe you're now even more convinced and or know how to convince others to give Quarkus a try. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So yes, I can give it back to Bruno now, if you're still there. And yeah. Thanks for all the attention.
Hey, Sebastian, that's great, man. That's awesome presentation. That's so many things that you talk about here. There's a couple of more questions here. Antonio's asking, do you suggest any books on Quarkus? Do you have any book that I know you have a book about Java EE, right?
Yes, my book was more in Java EE, although some things are still sort of relevant with the APIs. Yes, I have to admit I didn't. Don't even know if I read some book or just parts of it. I know that I think mainly Red Hat folks wrote some book about Quarkus. For now, I mainly had a look at the guides and also YouTube content, also because it's still fairly new. There are some books that are advertised on the on the website that I would then check out, especially if you're interested in learning it from books. Other than that, also, video content, and of course the guides, and of course trying it out yourself. But also reading the guides are really, really helpful. They give you even some detailed knowledge. So I would say it depends a little bit more on how you're learning, or how, what your preferred medium is. So yes, thank you, Martin. The Quarkus in Action, for example, is one, yes, that you can check out. And I think the Quarkus website also teases a few.
Okay, that's great. So yes, some okay. So guys, Sebastian has a great website, right? So if you go here on this QR code on the screen, Sebastian has a newsletter, right, where he talks about news on Java and cloud and Java EE and Quarkus, all that, right? So you should go there and register for Sebastian newsletter, and get some great material there. Since we're talking about some things here, if you can get, let me get to the Quarkus Club. I'm going to put a URL right here, or QR code right here on the top, where you can join the Quarkus Club, right? So if there's a Discord server there, where you can join the Quarkus. The Quarkus Club is the largest Quarkus community outside of Red Hat, right? So you should be there. There are several channels in Portuguese, but there are also several channels in English. I think those are the two languages that there are on the Quarkus Club, right? So you guys should join there. There's people from all over the world. Lots of people from Red Hat are there. Lots of people from Quarkus are there. Anything that you want to talk about Quarkus Club, Igor, that I'm not saying?
Yeah, it's a Discord group, right? You should be able to find. We're going to put the link in the description. And if you watch this by the Quarkus Club, stay tuned, because we already have our next session is going to be 15 July. So not this Monday, the following one. It's with Eric DeAndrea, another Java champion, and his principal senior advocate on Red Hat. So it will be nice content. And again, I always say the same things. Sebastian, thanks so much for your time, for the amazing presentation. On behalf of all the Quarkus Group community, thanks so much for whatever you do, right? The content that generates, all the videos, all the blog posts. Keep doing. Thanks so much. And yeah. Bruno, again, was amazing doing this together talk, right? Or together presentation, if you like. Hope we do it again in the future. Let's see how it goes.
It's great. Yes, it's good. So, so join the Sebastian newsletter, join the Quarkus Club. There's a QR code on your screen, in the top of your screen there. And Sebastian, thanks a lot, man. There's a lot of people saying here, talking about, this. Let me put some here. Lots of people saying thank you, great session, thank you. So great session, thank you, says Claudio. And then Andres, sorry, the question came late, right? So now there's one more question here. So how do you try to convince an enterprise that has its entire code base on Spring to switch to Quarkus, right? Is that something that people are doing, switch from Spring to Quarkus?
That's a very good question. So let's take this as a last question, because that's a very cool one. Yes. How would I try to convince? I mean, basically convince pretty much with what this session was about, that we say, okay, as a developer, I say actually the best way to convince is just to try it out, just the development mode. Don't listen to me, just try it out yourself, and you will see it's really fun. It's great for the development experience, and that's just that. From the business perspective, pretty much what we talked about. And then the question is how to do the actual migration once you convince them. So we did this actually a few times with migrations. Many times it was actually simpler that we thought, or in other words, the closer you were to the standard way to implement enterprise applications, either with Spring or with the old Java EE way, the faster it is, because the programming model is very straightforward. many times it's really just, search and replace for some annotations and things like that. Usually the project configuration then requires a little bit of more time, but for most of the classes, it works quite well. So it's not really a question of how big the project is. Even if you have hundreds of classes, if all of them are pretty much straightforward, then it's very simple to migrate it, actually. It's more about how custom the setup and the configuration is. What might help you, and what we also used, is the Spring support in Quarkus, that you say, okay, if you have a lot of classes that you don't want to touch yet, or that you don't want to touch at once, that can be a nice intermediate step where you say, okay, you can define all of your beans in a Spring style and still run it in a Quarkus application. So that's also a way. But then, things just like taking it one by one help. Your IDE support with search and replace helps. You can use Open Rewrite, which is also a good tool if you have a little bit more sophisticated stuff for recurring things. So I actually recently have supported a very large project that in this case was an application server setup with old EJBs, but that came with many classes that all came in a recurring pattern. So then some, sort of semi-automation migration helps a lot, and then just, take it from there. But often it is a little bit less intimidating than that you might think. So also a good way forward would be, if you have hundreds of repositories, if just start with a simple one, do a POC, see how it performs, see the development experience, and then also how it integrates into your workflow, and then take it from there and see if it works for you. But I'm quite positive that, then you can move it forward and migrate to Quarkus. And yeah, very, very good question. So thanks for that.
Okay, that's awesome. All right, so I think we're getting to the end of it here. Just a couple of more notes here for everyone. If you want to join, So Java also has a Discord server, so I'm going to put the QR code here on the screen. We also have some channels in English, so if you want to join us there and have a conversation, So Java has. If you're watching this on the So Java channel, remember that we have a special channel that's the So Java International. It's only English content. So if you're not, if you don't speak Portuguese, you might want to subscribe to the So Java International, because then you get all of our English content there. All right. Also, let me give a little gift here for everyone. We have this series of books, the Long Hanging Book series. It's several short books, right? It's like there's very actionable to help you on your career, right? So if you want, we have like 6 or 7 books right now. We're adding a couple of more. Actually, I saw here the Java guy, Ivan, from Munich, and he just finished a book. I'm just waiting for him to send it to me so he can add to the page there, right? So if you want, you can have several books there here to help your career. And have books, have books by, I have my book is there. Rafael Del Netto's a Java Champion, his book's there. Eyal, it's a Java's group leader, his book is there. So lots of books there that you can get there. And the last thing is, this for the Portuguese speaking ones, you can be a associate of So Java, and if you do that, we're still in our promotion with 50% off. So if you join as associate of So Java, you get some very special workshops and mentorings for your career. So we're almost at the end of this 50% off promotion, because we did this promotion while we were organizing the whole associates process. So if you want, that's a good place for you to join in right now and become associated of So Java right now. Okay. Anything else that anyone wants? So Sebastian, thank you so much, man. It was awesome to have you here with us. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks so much for you being here with us and doing something that it's not very common. You stayed here. You answered absolutely every single question. We're almost 2 hours of conversations here, and you got everyone. You got everyone's attention. Thanks so much, man, for sharing so much time with us.
Yeah, really my pleasure. It was a lot of fun. I love answering all these questions. Really good questions also. And also very big thanks to our two hosts here. Like really, you also very engaged and stayed active, and popping in all the right questions at the right time. And yes, that's also really appreciated. So thanks a lot to the two of you. Thanks, Igor. Thanks, Bruno. And also to everybody, especially we were talking about careers and independence. If for some reason you're not subscribed to Bruno's newsletter and the tips on the developer career, you definitely should do so. Definitely listen to this man when it comes to improving your career as a developer. And a lot of helpful tips, and I love reading these newsletters and interesting stories. So that's also a big one there. And yeah, thanks again to the two of you for this session and for setting it up.
Thanks so much, Sebastian. Well, if you mention me, so how about I give my book for free for everyone, right? So if you guys want the free chapter of my book there, and then you're gonna join the newsletter that Sebastian's talking about. So last gift here for everyone. All right, thanks, Sebastian, for the plug right there, man. Okay, guys. So thanks, everyone. It was awesome. Igor, thanks a lot, man. So that was the first that's Sebastian, let me tell you this. So because you wanted to talk about Quarkus and we did this is the very, very first Quarkus Club and So Java initiative together. We've done some small things on before, but that's the first one, the first international discussion we did this. So thanks so much for being our first guest on this initiative. And me and Igor are going to be working together to bring this more things about Quarkus and Java for everyone. So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks again, Sebastian. Thanks, Igor. Thanks, everyone.
See you next time.
See ya.